Do you believe there is a country, the only English-speaking nation in all of South America, where jaguars still roam free? Ancient indigenous tribes protect forests that cover more than 80% of the land. And an oil discovery that could make it one of the richest nations on Earth per capita. And yet, almost nobody on the planet can point to it on a map. A place sitting at the edge of two worlds, the Caribbean and the Amazon, that doesn't fully belong to either. A land with rivers so vast they serve as highways, and a rainforest so intact it has barely been touched by the modern world. A country of 800,000 people, quietly sitting on one of the most extraordinary natural and cultural stories of the 21st century. And still, nobody talks about it. This is Guyana. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why that silence is about to end. From the air, Guyana doesn't reveal itself all at once. It unfolds in layers. First, a narrow strip of low-lying coastline, fragile, flat, and almost entirely reclaimed from the sea. A thin ribbon of civilization protected from the Atlantic by a vast man-made seawall. This is where nearly 90% of the population lives, below sea level. Beyond it, the land transforms completely. The trees begin and they don't stop. An ocean of ancient green that swallows everything, stretching further than the eye can follow. Broken only by the silver ribbons of three great rivers, the Essequibo, the Demerara, and the Berbice. Together they are not just waterways, they are the roads, the lifelines, the borders of daily life. And further south still, the forest gives way to something unexpected. The sweeping golden savannas of the Rupununi, rolling grasslands, isolated mountain ranges, termite mounds casting long shadows at dusk. A landscape that feels like it belongs to another continent entirely. Three completely different worlds, all within one country. Nature here is not scenery. It is the architect. It decides where people live, how they move, what they eat, and how they see themselves. To understand the people of Guyana, you first have to understand the land that built them. Guyana has a saying that outsiders learn quickly. There are not 4 seasons here. There are 2, the wet and the dry. And sometimes, often without warning, both in the same afternoon. The tropical sun rises fierce and bright, and by midday the heat is a physical thing, heavy, humid, pressing down on everything. The trade winds offer relief, a warm, steady breath that moves through the open wooden houses and stirs the leaves of the mango trees. And then, almost without notice, the sky darkens. The clouds build fast, and the rain comes, not a drizzle, but a full, total, dramatic downpour that turns streets into rivers and sends everyone scrambling for cover. And then, 20 minutes later, it stops. The sun returns, steam rises off the pavement, and life carries on exactly as it was. Watch this happen a few times and you start to understand something about the Guyanese character. There is no point fighting what you cannot control. You read the signs, you adapt, and you keep moving. The unpredictability of the sky has quietly shaped a people who are flexible, patient, and remarkably unbothered by disruption. In Guyana, the weather doesn't interrupt life. It is part of it. But it isn't only people who call this place home. Guyana sits within one of the most biodiverse regions on the planet. And unlike much of the world, the wildlife here hasn't been pushed to the edges. It lives alongside the people, sometimes literally. In the rainforest interior, the jaguar still moves through the undergrowth as it has for thousands of years. The giant river otter, one of the most endangered mammals on Earth, raises its young in the tributaries of the Essequibo. The harpy eagle, wingspan wider than a grown man's arms outstretched, nests in the canopy above indigenous villages. And the macaw, in colors almost too vivid to be real, crosses the morning sky in pairs. In the Rupununi savannas, giant anteaters shuffle through the grasslands at dusk. Caimans line the riverbanks at night, their eyes catching torchlight like scattered embers. And in the rivers, the arapaima, one of the largest freshwater fish on Earth, growing up to 3 meters long, still swims in waters clean enough to drink from. More than 80% of Guyana's rainforest remains intact. In an era when the world is losing its wild places at a staggering rate, that number is almost difficult to believe. This is not a country where nature is something you visit on weekends. Here, it is the default, the baseline, the thing that was here long before the seawall, long before the oil rigs, and long before anyone thought to put this place on a map. To understand who the Guyanese people are today, you have to go back, not just decades, centuries. The indigenous peoples were here first. The Makuji, the Wapishana, the Patamona, the Arawak, nations whose history in this land stretches back millennia. Their knowledge of the forest, the rivers, and the land beneath their feet is not academic. It is lived, daily and passed from grandparent to grandchild, in languages that predate any European arrival by thousands of years. Then came the colonizers, the Dutch, the French, the British, each leaving their mark on the architecture, the legal system, and the language. English remains the official tongue today, a legacy of British rule that lasted until independence in 1966. But walk through any market, ride any minibus, sit on any veranda at dusk, and what you'll hear is Guyanese Creole, a rich, expressive, poetic language that is the true mother tongue of a nation, born from necessity, shaped by centuries of contact between cultures, and today worn with quiet pride. In the 19th century, 2 more chapters were written, both painful, both permanent. Enslaved Africans were brought to work the sugar plantations. After emancipation, they did something remarkable. They pooled their resources, bought land collectively, and built free villages from nothing. A legacy of community, resilience, and self-determination that still defines Afro-Guyanese culture today. And then came indentured laborers from India. Men and women promised a new life in exchange for years of grueling plantation work. They brought their religions, their food, their music, and their traditions. And those traditions didn't fade. They took root. Today, the Indo-Guyanese community is the largest ethnic group in the country, and their cultural contribution is woven into the very fabric of daily life. Add to this the Portuguese, the Chinese, and you have what Guyana calls itself with genuine pride, the land of 6 peoples. Not a melting pot where differences are dissolved, but a tapestry where every thread is still visible, still distinct, and still very much alive. This history is not taught only in classrooms. It is eaten at the dinner table, celebrated in the streets, and heard in the laughter of children playing in the yard. There is a dish in Guyana that tells you everything you need to know about its people. It is called pepper pot, and it is unlike anything else on earth. The recipe comes from the indigenous peoples, specifically from a thick, dark sauce made from cassava root called cassareep. When combined with meat and slow cooked over heat, cassareep does something remarkable. It acts as a natural preservative, which means a pot of pepper pot, once started, never truly has to end. You add to it, you reheat it, you eat from it, and with each passing day, it deepens. The flavors grow richer, more complex, more layered. A pot that has been going for a week tastes different from one that has been going for a month. In many Guyanese households, the pepper pot is started at Christmas and kept going into the new year. Families gather around it on Christmas morning with thick slices of homemade bread, eating from something that connects them, without anyone having planned it that way, 2 generations before them. Nobody required them to keep this tradition. There is no law, no government campaign, no cultural preservation grant behind it. They simply kept doing it because it mattered, because it was theirs. And that quiet, deliberate choice to hold on to something old, not out of obligation, but out of genuine love for it, is perhaps the most revealing thing about the Guyanese character. In a world that is moving faster every year, they are a people who understand that some things get better the longer you let them simmer. There is a concept in Guyana that doesn't have a direct translation in most other languages. It is called liming. To lime is to do nothing in particular, together. To sit on the veranda as the evening cools, to lean against a fence and talk, to share a drink, play a hand of dominoes, watch the street go by. It sounds simple, but in practice it is a social glue that holds everything together. In Guyana, the door is rarely fully closed. Neighbors move in and out of each other's homes with an easiness that would surprise an outsider. A cup of sugar borrowed never needs to be asked for twice. A plate of food from the evening meal finds its way next door, without anyone thinking it unusual. Children play freely across yards, looked after not just by their own parents, but by a quiet, collective watchfulness that the whole neighborhood shares. The traditional Guyanese home, a wooden colonial-style house raised on stilts, was designed with this in mind. The space underneath, known as the bottom house, is not wasted. It becomes a social hub, a place to hang a hammock, repair a net, escape the midday heat, or simply sit and talk with whoever passes by. Architecture built around the assumption that people will always show up. Multiple generations live under one roof, or close enough that it makes no difference. Grandparents, the Aja and Aji, the Nana and Nani, are not sidelined. They are central. They are the keepers of the recipes, the stories, the wisdom that no school teachers can teach. One outsider who spent time living in a rural Guyanese community put it simply: I have never felt so immediately part of something. Within a week, people knew my name, my business, and were feeding me. I didn't ask for any of it. It just happened. In Guyana, trust isn't a policy. It isn't enforced or incentivized or talked about in motivational terms. It is simply the water everyone swims in, the default setting of daily life. built not by institutions, but by generations of people who understood that in a land this vast and this challenging, the only way through was together. There is something that stops most people when they first hear it. The majority of Guyana's population lives below sea level. Not metaphorically, literally. The coastal plain where Georgetown sits, where the markets bustle and the minibuses run, and the pepper pot, Samos. All of it sits below the waterline of the Atlantic Ocean, pressing against the other side of the seawall. And that seawall has been there in various forms since the Dutch began building it in the 17th century. Maintained, extended, repaired, generation after generation, by a people who made a simple collective decision. We are not moving. But the seawall is only part of it. Beneath the streets and fields of the coastal plain runs an intricate network of canals, cokers, sluice gates that control the flow of water in and out of the land, and drainage channels that together form one of the most quietly extraordinary feats of water management in the Western Hemisphere. A system so embedded in daily life that most Guyanese barely think about it. It is simply there, doing its work, holding back the sea. And then came the rivers. 3 great rivers cut the country into sections. And for most of its history, crossing them meant a ferry, a wait, and a long journey. The Demerara River, running through the heart of the country, was for decades crossed by one of the longest floating bridges in the world. A pontoon bridge that would swing open to let ships pass and swing back to let traffic through. It was impractical by any modern standard. It was also entirely theirs, and it worked. Today, a new fixed bridge is under construction. A symbol of a country that is no longer engineering around its limitations, but through them. They don't complain about geography here. They build around it, under it, and over it. Quietly, practically, and without fanfare. On the surface, Guyana looks like a small, unhurried nation. A country of farmers, fishermen, and market vendors. Of rice paddies stretching to the horizon and small boats heading out at dawn. And for most of its history, that picture was accurate. But look at the numbers today and something extraordinary comes into focus. In 2015, offshore oil was discovered in Guyanese waters. Not a modest find. One of the largest oil discoveries in the world in decades. By the early 2020s, Guyana had become the fastest growing economy on the planet. A nation of 800,000 people sitting on reserves that global energy companies were lining up to access. In Georgetown, the change is visible. New buildings rising on the skyline. International companies opening offices. A pace of development that feels almost disorienting against the backdrop of a country where life has moved at the same gentle rhythm for generations. But here is what makes the Guyanese story different from so many other resource booms. The foundations were already there. Sugar and rice, the bedrock of the economy for centuries, built something more than just an agricultural industry. They built a culture of working the full chain, of planting, tending, harvesting, processing, and distributing with your own hands and your own community. Of doing one thing with complete commitment, rather than many things poorly. Gold and diamond mining in the interior has long drawn people into the remote rainforest. A hard, isolated, high-risk life, driven by the possibility of fortune. It is a world entirely apart from the coast, governed by its own rules and its own rhythms. But it too reflects that same Guyanese instinct. Go deep, work hard, back yourself. The question now, the one that every economist, every politician, and every ordinary Guyanese citizen is sitting with, is whether the oil wealth will follow the same philosophy. Whether it will be used to lift every community, from the savannas of the Rupununi to the fishing villages of the Essequibo coast, or whether it will concentrate, as new wealth so often does, in the hands of the few. In cities you compete to survive. Here the tradition has always been to trust and contribute. The hope, and it is a real and widely held hope, is that the new economy remembers where it came from. Guyana is a country it is very easy to fall in love with. And that is precisely why this part matters. The coastline that the majority of the population calls home sits below sea level. And climate change is not an abstraction here. It is a yearly reality. The flooding that comes with the heavy seasonal rains is not an occasional inconvenience. It is a recurring crisis that swamps homes, destroys crops and strains a drainage infrastructure that was never built to handle what the weather is now delivering. For the families living closest to the water, the question is not whether it will flood. It is how bad it will be this year. The electrical grid is unreliable in ways that test the patience of even the most unbothered Guyanese spirit. Power outages are a common enough part of daily life that generators and candles are standard household equipment. In a country now producing significant quantities of oil, the gap between what exists underground and what flows through the power lines of ordinary homes is a tension that is hard to ignore. Then there is the brain drain. Education is a point of immense national pride. The schools, the University of Guyana, the deep cultural emphasis on learning as a path forward. But for generations, the destination of that learning has too often been somewhere else. The United States, Canada, the United Kingdom. Nearly every Guyanese family has relatives living abroad. The diaspora is enormous, skilled, and deeply connected to home. But they are not here, and the country feels that absence. The oil discovery has accelerated this tension rather than resolved it. New wealth is arriving fast. The infrastructure, the institutions and the systems needed to distribute it fairly are moving more slowly. Economic inequality, long a feature of Guyanese life rooted in its colonial history, now faces a new and more urgent test. How does a nation ensure that an oil boom does not simply create a new plantation, with new owners and the same old imbalance? And then there is the rainforest. More than 80% of Guyana intact. A globally significant carbon sink that the world desperately needs. Guyana has been ahead of the curve on this, selling carbon credits, positioning itself as a model for conservation. But the pressure that comes with being an oil producer sits in direct and uncomfortable tension with the identity of a nation that has long defined itself by the health of its forests. There is no easy answer here, and the Guyanese people know it. These are not the shadows of a failing place. They are the honest complications of a country in genuine transition. One that carries the weight of a difficult history while trying to build something better. That work is real. It is ongoing. and it deserves to be seen clearly. So why do they stay? In a world that offers endless elsewhere, faster cities, higher salaries, shinier opportunities, why do the people of Guyana choose this? Why does the fisherman still head out before dawn on the Essequibo? Why does the grandmother still start the pepper pot on Christmas Eve? Why does the young graduate, diploma in hand, turn down the offer abroad and come back to a neighborhood where the power cuts out twice a week? The answer, when you spend enough time here, becomes obvious. And it has nothing to do with the oil or the rainforest or any statistic. It is the bottom house at dusk, filled with the sound of people who have known each other their whole lives. It is the market vendor who has been saving the best mangoes for you because she knows you'll be in on Friday. It is the child running between 3 different yards, claimed and watched over by all of them. It is the river at golden hour, moving slowly, carrying everything and asking nothing. It is a life measured not by its speed, but by its depth. We live in a world that has convinced us that more is always better. More noise, more options, more connection, more output. A world where the pace never slows and the notifications never stop. And the idea of sitting quietly on a veranda, watching the evening come in, feels almost radical. Guyana is a quiet but powerful reminder that there is another way to measure a life. Not by how much you accumulated, or how far you traveled, or how many places recognized your name, but by the depth of your roots, the warmth of your table, the strength of the people standing next to you. This is a country that the world has largely overlooked. A nation without a loud voice on the global stage, without a famous skyline, without a brand. But it has something that is becoming increasingly rare and increasingly precious. It has a soul. And maybe the real question, the one worth sitting with long after this video ends, is not why so many people choose to stay in Guyana. It's why the rest of us are in such a hurry to leave wherever we are.